My mother, Loretta Young, did Call of the Wild. Well, the first time I knew who my father was, I was 23, and I was 2 weeks away from being married. And I said to my fiancé, I can't marry you. I don't know who I am. And he smiled and he said, well, I know everything there is to know about you. He said, you're Clark Gable's daughter. They were the ones who shattered what seemed untouchable friendship, marriage, and loyalty. Some stars whispered and touched their co-star's wife right on set the moment his back was turned. Others took advantage while a husband was busy entertaining guests to slip away with his wife into a private room. There were even those who dragged their friend's wife into a yacht cabin and locked the door behind them while the husband stood just a few meters away, completely unaware. These affairs were not moments of reckless impulse, but carefully arranged, hidden behind cash payments, studio power, and the silence bought from the press. So, which golden era stars slept with their co-stars' wives? How did they conceal it? And in the end, did they have to pay the price for what they had done? We're about to find out. Clark Gable, the secret love child hidden for nearly 70 years. Hollywood in 1935 glittered like pure gold. The king of Hollywood. Clark Gable was already the #1 star, trailed everywhere by reporters and adoring female fans. On paper, he was the model husband of Maria Franklin Gable. But behind the scenes, a shocking secret was taking shape, one that Hollywood would try to bury for nearly a century. That winter, Gable flew to Alaska to film Call of the Wild with Loretta Young, the green-eyed beauty with a voice as soft as velvet. In the freezing cold, isolated on set, the two often stayed behind after filming, sipping hot cocoa and talking for hours. One lighting crew member recalled, once I saw them walk out of the prop tent near midnight, their hands brushing their eyes locked on each other. Not long after, Loretta discovered she was pregnant. For a star at the height of her career and unmarried, it was a devastating blow. But worse still, the father of her child was the most famous man in America and still another woman's husband. The news reached MGM and the studio went into panic. President Louis B. Mayer called an emergency meeting in a locked room on Washington Boulevard. Slamming his fist on the table, his voice thundered, "If this gets out, Clark loses everything, and the film dies before opening day." That very night, 2 MGM security men quietly entered Loretta's quarters, ordering her to pack and leave Alaska immediately. A guard later recalled, she cried the entire way to the airport, repeating over and over, "I don't want to leave like this." Loretta vanished from Hollywood as if into thin air. The press was told she was resting for her health, but in reality, she slipped into a small California town into a secret maternity home. The baby girl's birth certificate listed the father as John Doe, but the handwriting suspiciously resembled Clark Gable's secretary. Worse still, a love letter from Gable to Loretta, written just before the birth, nearly exploded into scandal. A young reporter stumbled upon the draft, but within hours, MGM men arrived, placed a thick envelope on his desk, and coldly said, "You saw nothing." The reporter later recalled, "I still remember the smell of burning paper as they set it aflame." But the words in that letter never left my memory. Months later, Loretta returned to Hollywood in a pristine white dress and gentle smile. She announced she had been away doing charity work and had adopted a baby girl. No one dared ask further, and the perfect cover story concealed the truth. It was her own daughter, fathered by Clark Gable. The secret remained locked away for nearly 70 years. Only after Loretta's death did her daughter discover an old wooden box containing love letters and a photo of Gable cradling her as a child. In an interview with ABC News, she confessed through tears, "I looked at that photo and knew instantly, blood cannot be hidden. He and we share the same face." Hollywood erupted. It was dubbed the greatest cover-up in film history, where a studio wielded enough power to control the press, the police, and even a person's fate. But that was an era when kings were shielded at all costs. For Steve McQueen, however, things were different. Just one night was enough to make his scandal headline news. Steve McQueen entangled in an affair with a colleague's wife. In the early days of their careers, Vic Damone and Steve McQueen were friends. They shared drinks at Musso, and Frank laughed about new films, expensive sports cars, and cross-country drives. But that brotherhood began to fracture on a night later known as the birth of scandal. A waiter at Ciro's, one of Los Angeles' most exclusive clubs, swore he saw McQueen and Niley Adams seated together in the VIP lounge for hours, giggling like lovers. A drummer at Mocambo recalled Steve didn't hesitate to place his hand on her back. The way he looked at Nyla, that wasn't how you look at your friend's wife. Rumors spread quickly. Vic Damone heard whispers, but brushed them aside, telling a friend, "No, Steve's my buddy. Brothers don't do that to each other." But everything collapsed one evening in Beverly Hills. At a party filled with studio moguls, McQueen and Neil left together under the curious eyes of guests. Vic sat alone, glass trembling in his hand. Near midnight, he called McQueen. His voice was heavy, each word restrained. "I hope what I've heard is just lies. Because if not, Steve, you won't want to see me at your door." On the other end, McQueen replied slowly, almost defiantly, "Vic, man to man, you know how it is." Weeks later, Nyla filed for divorce. Paparazzi snapped photos of her and McQueen holding hands on Malibu Beach. A Hollywood Reporter splashed the headline, "Couldn't they wait?" A young photographer admitted he once captured McQueen and Nile embracing backstage, but by morning, McQueen's men had arrived with a thick envelope and took the reel away. Their wedding came quickly. The public speculated about the true beginning of their love. But no one could deny McQueen's dangerous allure. The man who lived on the edge, racing cars, illegally brawling in bars, and loving women recklessly. But marriage soon became a battlefield. In her memoir, Nile wrote that McQueen forced her to abandon her career while he continued late-night escapades with whiskey engines and other women. A waiter at Ciro's remembered one night Nile came looking for him only to find Steve sitting between two young beauties. She stood at the door staring for a few seconds, then left without a word. Years later, McQueen remained McQueen, rebellious, magnetic, never at peace. Repeated betrayals, jealousy, and suffocating control eventually destroyed their marriage. In 1972, after more than a decade together, Nile filed for divorce. In her memoir, she wrote a chilling line, "Steve once broke another man's marriage to have me. And then, he broke our marriage to lose me." If McQueen flaunted his affairs openly, Clint Eastwood sowed his scandals in the shadows of film sets where every glance and touch sparked whispers across Hollywood. And that story began in New Mexico, 1968. Clint Eastwood, an affair in plain sight on set. At noon on the Hang 'em High set in the New Mexico desert, the cast was chatting over coffee when suddenly chairs crashed, cups shattered. Everyone turned in shock. Veteran actor Pat Hingle, usually calm, was charging straight at Clint Eastwood, face-flushed finger jabbing the chest of Hollywood's man with no name. A lighting technician recalled, "I heard Pat shout, 'You think I don't know?' And Clint just stood there, eyes locked, like daring him." Minutes earlier, Pat's wife, Alice Faye, had left the set. Her presence had long raised questions. She wasn't in the film yet, she was there nearly every day. At first, people thought she was just visiting Pat, but gradually it became clear she spent more time near Clint's trailer than her husband's. A costume assistant remembered between takes, Alice would walk straight to Clint, hand him water, and they'd talk for ages. Once I saw her laughing so hard she bent over at something Clint said. Another time, the entire crew saw Clint and Alice drive off in his green Jeep. They disappeared for 2 hours, returning with the excuse of scouting locations. But that day, no location scouting had been scheduled. The fire spread when a freelance photographer captured Clint and Alice dining at a Mexican restaurant 20 kilometers away. 2 days later, his film vanished, traded for a thick envelope from Clint's men. Still, a blurry photo leaked, and in Santa Fe bars, whispers grew. If that picture had been clear, there'd be no denying it. The breaking point came that afternoon. Pat was rehearsing lines when he heard Alice was in Clint's trailer again. He stormed out and the confrontation exploded. Director Ted Post and 2 assistants had to hold both men back to prevent a brawl in the desert. Afterward, Pat changed completely, no greetings for Clint, no